I would like to welcome all of you here to our City Council meeting. It's always nice to see citizens in the audience, so welcome. For the record, it is Tuesday, February 23rd at 6 p.m. We'll start with roll call attendance. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilmember Milam.
Here.
Councilmember Byrd.
Here.
Councilmember Palmer.
Here.
Councilmember Borton.
Here.
Councilmember Little Roberts. Here. Mayor DeVeard.
Here. Item number 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you all rise and join us in the pledge to our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3 is our community invocation. Tonight will be led by Larry Woodard with 10 Mile Christian Church. I always have to pause because I still want to call it Cherry Lane Christian. Every time. You can't teach old dogs new tricks. But thank you, Larry. If you'll please join us in the community invocation or take this as an opportunity for a moment of reflection.
Okay. Our dear Heavenly Father, before we begin the business before our City Council tonight, we just all bow our heads and thank you that you bless us every day and even sometimes when we don't deserve it. Tonight again, I pray for wisdom among our city leaders as they take up the business of our beautiful city. We thank you for the plans envisioned in the mayor's speech a few weeks ago, and we look forward to the changes that will make our city even more attractive and user-friendly. Tonight, I want to especially thank you and our City Council for all of the people who protect us, particularly our police. With the neighboring state promoting marijuana, our police have their hands full catching drug dealers. And according to my sources, they are doing a great job of protecting our citizens from this plague. With spring coming, we thank you for a mild winter and look forward to seeing flower gardens emerge in the next few weeks that will make our city even more desirable as a great place to live. I ask a special blessing on our city employees who work in a myriad of jobs, that you will bless them for their service to our community. I'm thinking of emergency personnel, clerks, planners, secretaries, janitors, etc. We have some new council members since the last time I was here, and I pray that after their first month, they feel a real part of this group and that their thoughts are wise and helpful. Hardly a week goes by that I don't meet a newcomer to our neighborhoods. Help us all to be a welcoming extension of this council as new neighbors arrive in Meridian from Seattle, California, and other places. Lastly, this is not a matter before this council, but I pray for our West Ada School District and pray that new leaders step forward who have the best interest of the students in this community in mind as they deal with overcrowding and past discord. I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And amen. Thank you, Larry.
I like you, yeah.
Item number 4 is adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Byrd.
on the consent agenda, 5E, the resolution number is 16-1121. And with that, I move that we adopt the agenda as published.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried. Item 5 is our consent agenda.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Byrd.
agenda, I've already, 5E is resolution number 16-1121. With that, I move we approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign and the clerk to attest.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Cavanagh.
Aye.
Councilmember Milam.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer. Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye.
Councilmember Byrd.
Aye.
Ah, you guys were paying attention. Good job. Okay, all in favor was passed. Okay, there were no items moved from the consent agenda. Item 7A under action items is a public hearing continued from January 19th. And I will open this public hearing with staff comments.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Byrd.
I need to recluse myself again.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, at the last hearing for this item on January 19th, the council continued this item in order to give the applicant time to meet with the adjacent property owners to the east, the Petties, to see if they could work out an agreement to construct a sidewalk along the frontage of their property on Victory Road, and to address neighbor concerns related to irrigation water delivery downstream from the proposed development.
That was fast.
Would you like me to go through the whole project again, or?
I
assumed that we
don't
just
think
wanted to
so.
Get the answers to those two items.
So, did you need anything further from staff? This is a continued public hearing. And does the applicant have anything to add? Thank you for being here. If you'll state your name and address.
Scott Wonders with JB Engineering, 250 South Beechwood in Boise, Idaho.
Thank you, Scott.
I guess I'll start with the Boise project and the lateral. We did have a meeting with them last week in regards to service. They weren't aware of any interruptions or anything other than just normal irrigation delivery that might have caused a delay, but they say all the water shares and everything is available both to this project and to the surrounding properties that get irrigation from that lateral. In regards to the adjacent property owner, the developer met with them a couple weeks ago in regards to some of the items that they had brought up during the hearing. Some of the items that were addressed were construction debris. During construction, the developer has agreed to install a silt fence along that property line immediately starting construction to trap any debris that may blow that way during construction. And then at final build out, or I guess at the final end of the construction, they'll build the 6-foot vinyl fence as we proposed and agreed upon at the last meeting. Other items that were discussed were the stub street that we have stubbing out to their property. That was discussed. And then also, and finally, the sidewalk. Developers still in agreement to construct that sidewalk along their portion of the frontage of Victory, but unfortunately they were unable to come to an agreement on an easement for that sidewalk. So again, the developer is still interested or still willing to construct it. However, the property owner was unwilling to provide that easement for the sidewalk where it would go in a developed condition. Other than that, I'd stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions?
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Borton.
Scott, I think one of the questions, sir, one of the questions was with regards to the lateral and connecting it to the east, or that potential of, is there an update on that as well? The pathway?
Yeah, we're open. We show it on our landscape plan. We would propose to put a pathway along the north side of the lateral, which is opposite of the service road for Boise project, similar to what they did to the subdivision to the east.
Okay, any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a continued public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to testify on this item? Good evening. If you'll please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Norma Petty. My address is 1155 West Victory Road in Meridian, and I am the property owner to the east side of this proposed subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So, if you don't mind, I would like to cover a little bit of territory that we might have talked about in previous, just because it's kind of my flow here of how I do things. Kentucky Ridge Phase 3 is on the other side of me. I am county. I am not annexed into the city. I am not proposing at this point that I even wanted to consider that. My property front on Victory is 300 feet. I have a hay field right now in the front of the property. My house is on the back side of it. When the representative came to us to ask about the sidewalk, it sounds like they were prepared to put in concrete only. It would not be built out, I guess, to what city specifications are with berms and landscaping, that sort of thing. After we, and by the way, as far as sidewalks are concerned, just as a reminder, Cobble Way, which is the subdivision across the street, does have sidewalks in it, but there is no sidewalks that continue onto Victory Road. So the 300 feet of my property, there is no sidewalk across the street either. So that's what the status is there. And right now, currently, that section of the road is 45 miles an hour. So after my husband and I met with the developer, we went down to ACHD to have a conversation as well. And to learn a little bit more about this project, Victory Middle School on Stoddard is slated to open, I believe, in the fall of this next year. And as part of Kentucky Ridge's build out, they are required to put in a sidewalk all the way down to Stoddard. When I was talking to ACHD about the sidewalk, their comment was they don't care what the construction is along my property. They wouldn't require anything to be to city specifications, and that if ever I wanted to be annexed into the city in the future, then of course I would be subject to any rules and regulations that the city has. So I'm kind of potentially looking at a couple of things. I am not being compensated for the loss of the agricultural field, the space that I'd have to give up, and should we ever request to be annexed into the city and develop our property, there's a good likelihood it would all have to be ripped out and rebuilt if that was ever the situation in the future. One of the other topics that we covered with ACHD was about my access from my property to Victory Road. Originally, in the Kentucky Ridge hearings, they talked about they prefer cross intersections onto Victory Road. In the middle of my property is where it would align up with South Cobble Way. If you approve Edge Hill and they grant a variance for that road, then that means if I ever wanted to, the ACHD is telling me that perhaps it would not be approved unless I went as a private road status if I ever wanted to develop, which means the county would never maintain the road. It would all be as a private lane. So those two things kind of concern me, the public safety for the children, and also the fact that it might impact the value of my property detrimentally if I ever want to develop it or be annexed into the city. So those are my two major questions. In the conversation with the developer, and also in the previous testimony, they had indicated that they're not in a hurry to build out this subdivision. If I understand things correctly, city services coming up Linder Road won't be coming to Edge Hill until 2019. When I asked the developer's representative about that, they said they're not interested in paying for those services themselves, that they're going to be waiting until 2019 when those services get there. Now, my property would be slated, if we were annexed, the way the master plan looks at right now, that it would go through Kentucky Ridge, and I have a stub up to my property. So I don't know how long, if you approve this subdivision, that it's good for, but what happens if they don't build out? and they requested a variance with ACHD, and then it causes me harm down the road as far as getting access and a publicly maintained road to Victory Road. So those are my major concerns as I see it right now. You know, being asked to allow a sidewalk on my property without any compensation for the loss of what I get with a hayfield, this is still a hayfield and it has value to it, you know, it seems a little bit unfair that all they're offering to do is just lay down concrete. So that's kind of my thing in a nutshell here.
Okay. Council, any questions? Thank you for your points, for discussion and consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Any additional testimony? Good evening. If you'll
My name
please
is Steve
state.
Just. I live on the corner of Cobble Way and Victory. I also have concerns about sidewalk being put in for the kids, because if that subdivision goes in, there's going to be a lot of children in there, and they're going to be going to that new school probably right there on Stoddard. Right now, there is no edge of the road for kids to walk on. Traffic moves 45 miles an hour. Semi-trucks coming from the gravel pit down the road. It's a dangerous spot. I do really believe that a sidewalk needs to be put in continually from this new subdivision up to Stoddard, and then a crosswalk up at Stoddard, because there's not one of those now. So there's no way to control traffic for kids crossing there. I don't know what you guys would do there, put a signal, put something. But I really do believe that the safety of public walking along that roadway is something that should be taken a look at. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Okay, any further testimony? Council, any further information needed from staff, the applicant, or, and I'll ask the applicant if he has further, anything further, but do you need to hear from ACHD at all?
Would be great. Sorry.
Kind of thought that before I asked the applicant to come up.
It's like you were reading my mind.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Justin Lucas, representing the Ada County Highway District. Business address is 3775 Adams Street in Garden City, Idaho. How can I help you?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
Justin, a couple of questions specifically related to the comments from the public related to crosswalks. I guess specifically, you're the subject matter expert. Say this neighborhood's developed. What impact does that have on ACHD to ensure that kids that I assume would be required to walk to school would be able to get from their homes to the school, excuse me, without any undue harm?
The question of sidewalk connectivity and safety in this area has come up before. This is an area of transition from rural to urban, and oftentimes these situations come up and they're difficult to overcome. That being said, I am aware that in a situation like this, if there's not a clear, safe walking route for the children to reach the middle school, that the middle school will provide safety busing. And that's been the commitment that we have received from the school district. So safety busing when it comes to getting to and coming home from school for children that live in an area like this. I'm not from the school district, but I can say typically that is what is provided because they have to provide it by state law. And so that answers one part of it. Now, the question of connectivity, though, certainly kids walk without, they have other reasons to get around. And in a situation like this, what is before you and what is before ACHD is an application for a development. The adjacent property is not part of that development. It's a county property, and so that makes it difficult to place any requirement on that adjacent property owner. For ACHD, it's impossible. We are not allowed to, by state law, require off-site improvements for a subdivision like this, for a development in this situation. And so you're in this situation of, if the developer's willing and able, then you can require those improvements. And ACHD, we try not to be a hurdle in that at all. As was mentioned, they come to ACHD, we say absolutely. We'll oftentimes waive requirements and do whatever it takes to make it a pathway necessary. But ultimately, the property owner has to allow that connection. Without that allowance, we do not, ACHD in this situation doesn't likely have the right-of-way to provide a path. There may be some ability to put it within the right-of-way, but along Victory Road, it's pretty tight, and I don't believe that the type of path that everyone is thinking of would fit within the existing right-of-way. So I don't know if that answers your questions or if it clarifies things. I know that is not the best answer. ACHD does have programs in place to fill gaps in the sidewalk. We every year come to the city and ask for your requests. We're going through that process right now for sidewalk gaps. And as part of that program, we are able to go out and try and fill these kinds of gaps. But does it always happen exactly in coordination with the development? No. The reason is we can't control the timing of the development either. And so it wouldn't make much sense for us to go build sidewalk in front of the lot adjacent to this one, and then the other one doesn't develop, and then it's a sidewalk that connects to nothing. And so oftentimes we come in after the fact. And I'm just trying to be as clear as I can on how it works. Is it ideal? Probably not. We used to not even have that program, so it's better than nothing. But the timing is an issue. And it's an issue that we have talked about with this council and mayor before. And it's an issue that we do everything we can to do to resolve it. But in a situation like this with an unwilling property owner, a neighbor, I don't know if there's anything we can really do to force the issue. That's what I can offer, and I can certainly answer any other questions you have.
I don't have any other questions. Madam Mayor, I appreciate that. I assumed that was kind of the direction that you were headed, but I wanted to ask the question rather than just assume. So I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our ACHD representative? Thank you, Justin.
Thank you very much.
Okay. There's no further testimony with the applicant. Yes, sir.
I'm Kevin Petty. I live at 1155 West Victor. My concern is, as the guy from ACHD says, that a school bus would pick kids up in situations like this. It's only about a half a mile. It seems kind of ridiculous, but maybe they do that. The thing I'm concerned about is during school hours, kids will be going by all the time. After school hours, when the bus brings the kids home, there are other kids at the school that are doing after school activities. How are they going to get through there? The roadway is only 11 feet wide. They're not going to be able to meet those cars. When the sun shines in the morning, I can't even see people out on the road, and they're out there. I have to stop and look. It's just that bad. And I think it's very, very unsafe for anybody to be out walking on the roadway. And no one can stand up to a 8,000-pound car or 18,000-pound truck or a motorhome or something. Vehicles now, they're 8'6" wide, and the roadway is only 11 feet. You don't have to be a math wizard to see that doesn't leave a lot of room for people to walk. And I just wanted to say that people are not gonna, they're gonna have a hard time getting home after school. If they're down there playing football, you know what I'm talking about. On the weekends, kids will be trying to come by. How are they gonna get by? I got a letter here that they sent to me that said that they was gonna offer no compensation at all. So to me, it seems like they're not interested in anything but the bottom line by not trying to get things to work. This is one reason that leapfrogging doesn't work, because it gives them a chance to jump over there, and then everybody else has to come back and try to find out what we can do to make things work. And so that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Petty.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Petty?
Mr. Petty?
Sir? Could
Could I
we
ask just
ask
a quick question for you?
Yes.
Just clarification. The other person, I think, from your address testified that there's sidewalk across the street. Is that accurate? I just want to make sure that I heard.
No, there is no sidewalk.
There's no sidewalk at all. Thank you.
And the sidewalks don't line up, the ones that that comes north, south out of Kentucky Way. They don't even line up with the way that Kentucky Ridge has come along there and put a 90-degree thing and dumped the traffic right out onto the roadway. They don't even line up. They're off probably 60 feet. So people are out there walking and trying to find the way, and the cars are stopping. I had a lady with a couple of kids walking in the road when I went to get my mail the other day. There was 4 cars backed up behind her so she could try to find her way to get onto that sidewalk, which doesn't line up with nothing. It's just already unsafe, and then this is just going to complicate things. And it's not that my wife and I aren't willing to make some kind of agreement. It's just that they're not willing to offer anything, and I think that should be stopped for that particular reason.
Madam Mayor. Sorry.
No, answer my question.
I have a question for you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to figure out now between your and your wife's testimony, is it compensation that you're looking for or a sidewalk done right? Does she kind of led me to believe that a sidewalk done to city standards would be acceptable because then it wouldn't cost you money when you developed.
Well, what she said was, if I got it correctly, that whatever they do put in there, and if someone does change it, then it would have to be done fancy with landscaping and everything to go with what is already there. And if they just put a straight sidewalk across the property, that would never last.
Sir, so I guess my question really is, if they were willing to put in the sidewalk the way that that the city would require it, had you annexed your property, would you be willing to give the easement for that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Not without compensation, and it looks to me like they're not interested. And so I feel everything should just stop until something is done along that line.
Okay?
Any more questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other testimony by the public? Would the applicant like closing remarks?
Good evening, Scott Wonders, 250 South Beechwood, for the record. Just another point of clarification on this. We do have along the Sundell lateral that we talked about with the micropath that we're going to have on the north side. It will actually tie into Kentucky Ridge to the east, providing an alternate route for kids to go through that subdivision to get to Victory rather than walking directly along Victory. That might be a solution to this issue that we're dealing with right now. And then I just wanted to point out another item in regards to sidewalk along Victory. We're kind of only focusing on this 300 feet, but if you go further to the east of Kentucky Ridge, there's another 600 plus feet all the way over to the intersection of Stoddard that also doesn't have sidewalk on either side of the street as well. So we're just kind of pushing the problem down the road. Being on transportation committees, I did look at the Meridian transportation recommendations for ACHD, and I did notice that Kentucky Ridge Road, I don't remember the street or way it is actually on a community program with ACHD to construct sidewalk, and maybe that would be something that you guys could look at with the transportation committee to add a little bit larger segment of sidewalk construction with ACHD. It's just something to bring up. But other than that, obviously the developer doesn't want to get held in a third-party negotiation for approval and be subject to that via condition. I would think you'd understand that. So I'm here to answer any other questions that you guys might have.
Okay, council, any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council, I would ask if there's any discussion on this application.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, as I remember when he came before, he was coming only asking for a variance on having to tile the lateral. And he's had to go through quite a bit to get back to the point that he is. I feel like they've made answered all the questions I have. I don't have a very good track record with motions on this item, so I'm going to defer that to anybody else who'd like to make the motion. But that's where I'm at on it.
Thank you. And Council, I know he needed to come back to answer the question about the lateral. I would just reiterate, we have our primary responsibilities for public safety, and making sure kids get safely to and from school is important. I find it a waste of taxpayer dollars to expect emergency busing a half mile away from a school. If we can't provide for a safe route to school, we should not be considering development until that safe route can be there. Because I would agree with the testimony that was stated. Kids don't live by a bus schedule. They live by their own timelines, and that sidewalk is important, and I would hope would be used. The area across the street from this was sidewalks, and so you'll not see a sidewalk on that side of the street. So really the only option is going to be on the south side, and what we can do to make a safe route for kids, I'm sure, is going to be something that if we don't do it now, they're going to be figuring out a way to get from one development to the other, and it's going to be along the roadway.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, I would defer to the parents as the primary responsibility for the safety of their children over the developer of the property they chose to purchase.
Mr. Palmer, I would too, but unfortunately I find life doesn't always work that way.
Madam Mayor.
Ms. Milo.
I agree with you, and it's really disheartening to have to maybe deny a decent development when they're willing to put in sidewalks on another person's property, which is going to increase the value and save them money in the long run. And that's the only way to create safe routes to school, it makes this really difficult.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Borton.
It's not a motion, but it's a comment for what it's worth. I see this, like other instances, the kind of difficult balancing act between the roles of us in approving land use items or not approving land use items, and what property issues are before the council and not. I thought when we left the last meeting, those two issues that the applicant was asked to address, there were, it appears, good faith efforts to discuss between the property owner and the applicant. That's really all they were asked to do. I applaud them both for trying to come to some resolution. It clearly has to be voluntary on behalf of an off-site landowner to participate in something like that, and it's their right to do with their property as they see fit. Understanding that might inhibit a city's desire to develop this parcel. But another component of what was, I think, improved was the connectivity and the pathway through this property, which didn't exist when we saw it before, that provided pedestrian connectivity to the east through Kentucky Ridge. It was referenced more recently that, from my perspective, alleviates some of the concern with regards to pedestrian connectivity going to the east. I think they've addressed that, and I wouldn't feel it necessary to deny an application like this merely because the property owner to the east and the developer were just unable to come to terms with regards to that important but small parcel. It's not our purview to require a sidewalk to go there. It would be great if it could. It can't. They made best efforts, but I think the resolution the developer did come up with that new pedestrian connectivity, at least for me, solves the legitimate concern of providing that safe route to schools.
I guess I would ask staff, that connection, is this already built out, or is this in a phase of the development to the east that's not yet developed?
Madam Mayor, it is under construction currently. They have approval for one of the phases from council. I'm not sure where they're at in the construction process, but it would provide a route up to Kentucky Way, up to Victory. Like the applicant stated, though, there is a gap between Stoddard and Kentucky, still along Victory. There's a little piece, yeah.
Madam Mayor.
There
yeah.
is an,
Oh, go ahead.
just to clarify what Caleb's saying in my ear here, there is another piece, if you can see my pointer here. This property right here has a plat approved by council on it. I'm not sure either where they are in the development process, but that would get it that much closer to Stoddard. So it's getting there.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Kavner.
couple of comments. I think oftentimes we as council look at a project or development as it sits in front of us, really from a 3-foot view. And from a 3-foot view, well, I still have some general concerns about the water and some issues there. The project as a whole, I think, has some merit. I think the challenge is for us as council, though, is to not necessarily look at every project from a 3-foot view, but to look at it from a 30-foot view and a 30,000-foot view and see how that fits within our community. And from a 3-foot view, there's relatively few issues, but from a 30,000-foot view and looking how our citizens move throughout our community and saying that we're a community that is more than just four-wheeled travelers. There's challenges. And to Councilman Borton's point, I applaud the developer and the developer's representative for trying to work with the neighboring landowner to procure some form of a sidewalk, whether it met city specifications right now or county specifications. I think to us means very little. It sounds, what I hear is that we would want a safe path for students to get to and from school. I think the effort to connect the neighborhood, while appreciated, doesn't solve the problem for the community as a whole, but merely for the residents in that neighborhood. So I think for the first time, at least this year, I've got a real humdinger here in front of me as far as going back and forth as to what's best for our community, not just today, but into the future. I'd appreciate any other comments from any of my colleagues. If you have any other insight that I am missing, I'd sure appreciate it.
It is a hunting.
It is. I don't think you want me to make a motion. I think everybody wants me to make a motion.
I go back and forth.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, I just keep going back to, I have a hard time telling people that want to move into our town that we don't trust them to figure out how to get their kids to school. Eventually, there's going to be the developments that come in where there's enough sidewalks to get them there to walk. But in the meantime, I trust that the parents of the kids that are going to move in here are going to figure out a way to get their kids to school safe. And I have an incredibly hard time telling a property owner they can't do something that it makes perfect sense with their property because somebody else hasn't done with their property what needs to be done first. They're ready to go. I say let them move forward and let the people that move in there take responsibility for themselves.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Borton.
For clarification, a question to staff, maybe the applicant, but probably staff, is the pathway along the canal within phase one?
It is not, Madam Mayor, Councilman Borton. Good point. If the council chooses to move forward with this, and that is a concern, I would suggest asking the applicant to include the common area here where my pointer is, the large common area, as well as the common area along the lateral here, so that the pathway can be extended with phase one.
Madam Mayor, we saw nods from the applicant. Since the public hearing's still open, would it be appropriate for them to come forward and state on the record if they're okay with that?
Scott Wonders for the record again. Yes, we're acceptable to moving that into phase one.
Okay. Thank you.
And so moving that into phase one and putting that in as one of the improvements prior to the first building permit?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. That'd all be built during the actual physical construction, so I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I don't see any.
All right,
But
thanks.
thank you. Any further information needed from council?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Borton.
it does not sound like it. Any other info? No? So I will move to close the public hearing on items 7A, H 2015-0005.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing on item 7A. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Madam Mayor,
Mr.
I will make a
Borton.
motion understanding it still can be discussed and perhaps amended, but in light of all the conversation that's taken place, I would move that we approve item 7A, H 2015-0005, as one motion, the annexation and zoning and the plat, tying them together. If there was an issue with the plat, I'm not comfortable approving an annexation without the plat as amended. So a motion to approve both of them to include all of the staff and applicant comments, in particular the amendments as noted in the staff report set for today's hearing of February 23rd, and to include the applicants granting the waiver to allow the lateral to remain open, conditioned upon the pathway and open space adjacent to it, all to be completed within phase one, and prior to the issuance of the first building permit within Phase 1.
Second.
Okay, council, any discussion? Okay, Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Cavanagh.
No.
Councilmember Mylum.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer.
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Item 8A is under department reports. We'll have an update from Jay Gibbons about our railroad trail. Not our railroad trail, but hopefully our railroad trail.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm going to be briefer. I'm not asking for a decision. I'm here for information purposes. A year ago, we completed a railroad trail arterial crossing study with a consultant. We had a different council then. We have some new council members, so the mayor asked if I would come back and give an update that covers that study, current status of recent efforts with regard to our railroad trail proposal, and we'll go from there. So I will start with a little bit of background. Of course, I'm Jay Gibbons. I'm the Pathways and Parks Project Manager for the city. I work in the Parks Department, and my job is to build pathways. So in 2009, the city adopted a railroad trail action plan, which was a study to look at the basic feasibility of utilizing our rail corridor that's currently underutilized and creating a multi-use pathway for recreational as well as alternative transportation with regards to bicycle and pedestrians across our city, which is a little over 6.5, just under 7 miles in width, as the rail runs right through the middle of our fair city. So last year, before I go any further, did I attach PowerPoint or a PDF to this?
You attached a PowerPoint, but normally you bring it on a thumb drive. It'll take me a minute to load it down here unless you have it. Okay.
Then I have something to talk to. You can look at pretty pictures, not just me. I will say, while that was loading, I did give the similar presentation to the Ada County Highway District Commission a couple of weeks ago, and it was well received by them. I was asked to come give them a presentation, and it was a very good discussion. And so.
Hey, Jay, do you want to use that presentation? I see one presentation to ACHD. Is that the same one? Yeah, different one.
No, that one is fine. Will it give me access to change here? Okay. So a year ago, we completed a study with project engineering consultants. They're out of Utah. They have some experience in Utah with Railroad Trail, and specific to the Union Pacific, or what was formerly Union Pacific in that area. When the Salt Lake Valley was able to convert part of a formerly owned section of track by Union Pacific, they converted to light rail, and there's a different operator now that actually owns and does the light rail from South Salt Lake all the way to Point of the Mountain near Provo. So they run light rail, and they do have a pathway along most of it. So we hired them for their experience. We utilized a federal grant through Compass administered by ITD, and ACHD was a stakeholder and a partner as part of that project. So it culminated in a nice hefty binder, which I can provide to anybody that wants to look through, This presentation is an overview, basically, of this report and explaining what we tried to accomplish. So with this study, our project area extended from the arterial crossing at Black Cat to the arterial crossing at Locust Grove. That's 7 crossings. And of course, you got 3 right downtown with Meridian Road, Main Street, and then 3rd Street. The reason we didn't extend all the way to Eagle Road was, well, it's a huge road at the moment, and it has its own concerns. We'll address that after we looked at the easy ones. And of course, there are multiple ways to get across these roads. We looked at the existing conditions where basically to the west, Black Cat is a 2-lane road at the moment. Stop sign at the track crossing itself. 10 Mile is a 5-lane road. And so it has been built out. Linder Road is still a 2-lane road. Stop signs for vehicle traffic on both sides. Meridian Road is 5-lane. Main Street is 2-lane. 3rd Street is 2-lane, and then Locust Grove is 5-lane. So we looked at existing conditions, as well as with ACHD's help, we looked at future conditions, so that we know what we're working with currently to cross a 2-lane road with a pathway versus a 5 or 7-lane road. Also, of course, you can cross over the roadway with the trail crossing, or you can go under the road with a rail crossing. We chose, as part of this study, the most difficult is at grade. You've got to cross all those lanes of traffic, and how are we going to do that? And we got to work with the railroad. The railroad was a part of this process. They were at all our coordination meetings to figure out their concerns, input. We also looked at, because we had previously worked with the railroad and at that time, and still are, unwilling to allow us to build a pathway within their 200-foot right-of-way. We looked at, as part of this study, what a crossing would look like if we were inside the right-of-way, if we find a way to make that happen, or alternatively, if we have to absolutely build a pathway outside of the rail right-of-way, adjacent to the rail right-of-way, what it would take to do that. It would be crossings that are farther away, of course, from the rail itself. And also, to further complicate it, we looked at both sides of the tracks, or both sides of the right-of-way. So our plan covers each of the 7 crossings, arterial crossings that I spoke of, and each one of those then has existing conditions on the north side, inside the right-of-way, outside the right-of-way, south side as well. So there can be 4 alternatives up to 7 alternatives for each of these roadways. That's why this got really thick. But these are the type of graphics that are on there in the plan. This happens to be 10 Mile. This is inside the railroad right away. And what we learned from the railroad is one of their big concerns in a pathway crossing at any of these roads and how it impacts the rail traffic. And we all know that there's really only 2 trains at the moment per day, one each direction. However, of course, the railroad would like to increase that if possible. But what they're concerned about is the vehicles that if the crossing can be nearer the railroad tracks themselves, this will avoid the potential to have cars stopped on the tracks when they stop for a pedestrian or a bicycle to go across the road and the trains coming at the same time. Their major concern from a safety perspective. I wish I could do things with my left hand, but I'm not so good at that. So this graphic shows basically what would happen at 10 Mile outside of the right-of-way. If we couldn't build or encroach on the rail right-of-way at all and had to stay completely out of the right-of-way, and we built adjacent to the right-of-way on the north side, you can see that our pedestrian crossing would be clear to the north end of the existing traffic separation island. And what that would do is potentially, if the pedestrian or bicycle is crossing on the crosswalk there, the cars back up, it's a long way. You could end up with cars, multiple cars on the tracks backed up as well. So there are lots of challenges. They brought up or illustrated many safety measures to confine bicycle and pedestrians to the pathway itself, utilizing fencing, and slowing down bicycle and pedestrian traffic from just walking out into the roadway itself. There are serpentine gates that's been utilized in other places that have been successful. We just don't want people, like on the Greenbelt, where you can go 22 miles and never have to stop because they magically go under the roads. Here we've got to stop at each roadway. So we've got it. Not to mention, there may be pedestrian signals in the future, which would more than likely come about on the multi-lane situation. It probably wouldn't happen on a on a two-lane road. It would be at build-out basically, but we've got to be concerned with all those types of things going forward. So they provided a cross-section. You can see the right-of-way is 200 feet wide, 100 feet on either side of the center line of the trail. What's illustrated here is should there someday be a light rail transit system, there is room in the existing right-of-way. If we had a pathway inside the right-of-way, there's still over 60 feet between light rail or the rail tracks or the pathway itself. So, you know, there's a lot of room, and like I say, it's underutilized, but we have some work to do with the railroad, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. This is a cross-section with all these things in section view as opposed to plan view. You can see the space relationship and the distances. This is an illustration of the different types of under and over crossing concepts and costs. These costs that they gave to us are based on actual. These are crossings that the project engineering consultants accomplished in Utah. One of them, I believe, is out Park City Way, and the other one is someplace in the Salt Lake Valley itself. And in our situation, it really varies on cost, aesthetics from a city perspective, but also groundwater in different areas of the city too. It's higher than it is than in other places. We may or may not be able to put under crossings most places. I don't know. There's investigation that would have to be done, and going forward, that's where we would take it. So, as an illustration, you know, as I said, we've had pushback from the rail owners in the past. Our efforts continue. You can see this graphic illustrates that in June of 2014, there were 217 railway trails built within 42 states. And those are successful systems, and there is a multitude of information available from basically the Rail to Trails Conservancy has assembled an archive of all kinds of studies and groups that put these projects together and how they were able to work with the railroad to accomplish their project, the agreements that they had to enter, and those agreements, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we've got to figure out what we can do to work in our particular situation. And these are some pictures of successful projects in other areas, and you can see the difference in setback and the different treatments from one project to the next in different locations with regard to how close some of these pathways are to the active rail. And a rail with trail is not a rail to trail in that it's a pathway along an active road line. And it really varies. Some of them are very active rails, and some of them are a lot lower key like ours. Some of them are higher speed, some of them are freight, some of them are passenger, but you can see some of them are within 6 feet and others are set back. There are fences separating most of them. Some are landscaped. Some go through more rural lands, and you can see that this one, the train's still pretty close to the bicyclists. They range all the way across the country. So like I say, each one presents its own potential conflicts. This one is actually an electrified rail, so you have that frightening third rail to think about, and they've never had an issue with it so far. And we hope that continues. And other ones, the different methods, some the land that the pathway resides on was donated. Some of it they had to purchase. Sometimes it's an easement. It really depends on what you can work out with the rail company itself. And part of that negotiation, you got cost, but it's also what safety features, what are you going to do for the railroad in order to accomplish that. I purposely avoided most of the cost. The cost of the pathway proposals in other places, because it's all across the board. But I can tell you that if you had to buy the property, that the land that the pathway actually sat on, be it inside the right-of-way or outside the right-of-way, it pretty much doubles the cost of the project. If you can secure easements, if you remember on the consent agenda tonight, there were 2 pathway easements. Those are adjacent to the north side of the rail corridor, out almost a 10-mile from a development application that we got 16 feet of easement. There were 2 of them side by side. It's a common area over 2 different common lots per se, but they're connected. Because we've had this plan in place and our Pathways Master Plan that corroborates this, they work in hand in hand with the city's comp plan, we're able to work with the development community to secure easements in that regard. But that's a long, slow road, and what we've kind of identified is really a railway trail project needs to be in the rail corridor. That's the least cumbersome. There are basically 100 property owners between McDermott and Eagle Road. It only takes 1 or 2 to say, no, we won't sell you property for any amount of money, and then we don't have a pathway. That's kind of why if we can work out a deal inside the rail right-of-way, be it an easement, be it a purchase, whatever, that's really where it needs to be. It's continuous. And to add on that, we've worked as a city for the last 7 years towards a railroad trail system. And in conversations in the past with our neighboring cities, Nampa and Boise, their planners have kind of always been, let us know how you worked that out. We'd really like to go there, but we want to see how you did it. And we kind of got to a point at the end of this past year, after this project, the crossing study was done, we've had our internal group meet several times over the last 6 or 7 months, and it was kind of, what's the next step? Where do we go from here? And it's time to bring the other cities in. Let's make this a regional effort. So that's kind of where we've gone. We met for the first time last month with representatives from the city of Nampa, the city of Boise, us, our internal group. ACHD is at the table, Compass is at the table, and we're looking at a regional pathway basically from the depot in Nampa to the depot in Boise. That's 22 miles plus. It has its challenges, of course, but everybody's on board. We actually have our second meeting this Friday. We're trying to identify a specific really good day each month to meet. Compass is working on a charter for this project so that then they can do some of the transportation and feasibility studies for us. That really is how we're going to get to the railroad. The railroad is concerned about safety. They're concerned with liability. They're concerned with the return on their investment because they're a business. They're concerned with their customer satisfaction, their rail customers that they serve. They're concerned with being good members of the community. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. And then they're concerned with how we're going to maintain and operate it in the future. And part of the reason that it makes sense to go regional with this is it doesn't make much sense to try to enter into agreements with the railroad. The city of Meridian has an agreement for this is the the form our pathway is going to take. It's going to be this wide. This is kind of fence we're going to use. We're going to maintain it in such a way. We're going to police it in such a way. And then Nampa has a totally separate agreement, and Boise has a totally separate agreement. We think it ought to be continuous. It ought to be congruent from one border to the next. I think we probably, even though this in the long run, it's all city turned or city supported, we probably ought to bring in Canyon County planners and Ada County planners just to make sure they're at the table and can lend support where in the interim until it becomes within city limits in every regard, because I would imagine that most of up to Boise's area city impact, there are very few county properties left, but there are probably a few, and we still have a lot, and Nampa still has a lot. So, so we've been working on this from a regional perspective now for a month or so, and we've reached out. I met, like I said, a couple of weeks ago with the ACHD Commission. They're in favor and willing to lend some support and help us any way possible as well. So. With that, I'm going to stand for questions, and just let you know that I'm a resource. If you want to have a conversation about any of this or status or whatever going forward, I'm on the second floor. Call me or stop in anytime.
Thank you, Jay. And I think this is a good summary from what the consultants gave you, and there is a thicker study if you want more information on what some of these trails are. A lot of the trails across the nation are on main lines. This is a spur that has very little traffic. We hope to continue to work with our railroad partners to increase that, to increase the industrial opportunities through here, while maintaining a successful railroad trail as well. Other areas have shown how successful they can be, and I do know some of our major employers along this rail corridor are very interested in this and the opportunity to not only get their freight, but to move their employees safely along this corridor. So I think we can make it a win-win for our community and our railroad partners to show the importance of this. And just on another note, Ada County Highway District, I think, also sees this as an opportunity for an option to address longer-term congestion on both Fairview and Franklin as well. So this is an important corridor. These partnerships are important to not only the short-term but the long-term opportunities that this corridor presents. Any questions for Jay?
Mayor?
Ms. Milam.
I don't have any questions, Jay, but great presentation. Thank you. I like where you're going with this and the collaboration. Very exciting project, and I hope to see it come to fruition at some point. Let's start with the 16 feet that we got. Oh, no? I'm just kidding about that part.
Well,
You don't have to comment.
Yeah, I was joking. Just about that end part.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for the update. And again, Jay's offer stands. If you want more information, there's certainly a lot more detail available that we can provide.
And I can come back as often as possible just to give you an update going forward with where the regional effort is going status-wise. The mayor will always be in the loop. If you want to be more in the loop, I'll be back whenever you want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
Item AB is under Community Development Block Grant Administrator. Sean is here with us. Welcome.
Mayor, Council. The agenda says 0 minutes, so I'll try to be as close to that as possible. This is
59
kind of
seconds.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to brief you tonight. Council members Palmer and Little Roberts, appreciate the meet you. Thank you. This is an agenda item because we have to do it. It's kind of a misnomer as a budget amendment. It's actually more of a budget reconciliation. The way that this works for CDBG, for the Community Development Block Grant, which is a HUD entitlement grant to the city, is our finance department, the city's finance department, ballparks what we think is going to be right about what our entitlement is going to be for the next year. And they have to do that when they go through the budget process in the summer. And then sometime around December, January, when we get through continuing resolutions with the federal government and we get our congressional release of funds, we know exactly what we're going to get. And so what this amendment actually does is just marry up what our line of credit is with what the finance department needs to have on the budget. And just to be very clear, this is not a request for any public funds. This is something that we already knew we were going to get. We just had to we're making the dollars make sense. Madam Mayor, I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sean. Council, any questions?
I have none.
Okay.
Madam Mayor. Maybe
Mr.
a
Kavner.
quick comment and then a motion if I can. One, just I think for the benefit of our other council members, both our new council members had the opportunity to sit down with Sean and community development staff coming on and have been briefed and updated on the CDBG program, which I appreciate you guys making time and effort to be able to do with our council members. With that said, I would approve the community development block grant budget amendment for a not to exceed amount of $29,857.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Kavner.
Aye.
Councilmember Mylum.
Aye.
Okay, Councilmember Palmer. Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye.
Councilmember Byrd.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried. Council, any topics for future meetings, agendas? Okay, I'll move to item number 10, executive session.
Madam Mayor. I move we go into executive session as per Idaho State Code 74-206B and I.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn into executive session. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Kavner.
Aye.
Councilmember Mylum.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer.
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye.
Councilmember Byrd.
Aye.
All ayes.